Well, good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. It is 1 p.m. Eastern, and thank you so much for joining us today for this very special conversation with the award-winning journalist, Ed Gordon. Can I just say, I am excited. I am Nicole Brown from the Department of Communication here at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and I'm your host today. But first, a very special thanks to our presenting sponsors, the Office of Multicultural Affairs and the Department of Communication. But please note, this is a nonpartisan conversation. And let me start here by saying this. We are in the midst of a global pandemic, social justice movements, and 14 days away from the election of our lives. The 2020 presidential election and the African American perspective has several layers of urgency to consider. Healthcare, education, criminal justice reform, economics, employment, equity and inclusion. Those are just a few topics off the top of my head. But Ed Gordon is here live right now to discuss his new program, Impact the Vote. Let me tell you about Ed Gordon, though. Ed Gordon is an Emmy Award-winning broadcaster. He is the recipient of the NAACP Image Award and the prestigious Journalist of the Year Award from the National Association of Black Journalists. That's just for starters. He's known for his stellar interactions with newsmakers from worlds of politics, entertainment, and sports. He is the president of Ed Gordon Media. And also he's an author. This year, he published his best-selling book entitled Conversations in Black. He serves as host and executive producer of Ed Gordon, a news magazine, which is on Bounce TV. And you can also know this. Gordon has hosted and executive produced the national syndicated one-on-one program, Conversations with Ed Gordon, which I enjoyed a whole lot. You can also know that he has interviewed celebrities like, let me throw these names out here for you. Oprah Winfrey, Denzel Washington, Kevin Hart, Beyonce, and so many others. And he was previously been a correspondent for CBS News show 60 Minutes 2, a contributor for NBC's Today Show and Dateline, the host of NPR's News and Notes with Ed Gordon, and the MSNBC anchor and host of the nationally syndicated television program Our World and Weekly with Ed Gordon. And of course, those of us who grew up on Black entertainment television, we know him from BET Tonight as the host and also the anchor of BET News, where we got all of our information. We can rely on Ed Gordon. I can go on and on about the one and only Ed Gordon, but you know that he covered BET's coverage of the 2012 presidential election, Obama's second inauguration term.
Up for the accolades. Let's get into it, girl.
I know it, right? So let's get into it. Ed Gordon, can I just say this? I was there at the 2017 NABJ conversation. Can I just say that? Yeah. And I walked past you.
It's funny for people that don't know, you're talking about the viral moment with Omarosa. And, 3 years later, people still talk about that. So
I had the ultimate respect for you at that moment because, I as a journalist, I grew up admiring you and all of that, but you have to understand, when I saw you in that moment and, Roland Martin did his, thing, I said, that's a journalist, that's my dude, and you handled your composure. And I walked past you a couple of times that day, and I just wanted to go, man, bruh, you did that. But I just want to talk to you, and I know that we have, and thank you for cutting me off, because I know that some people like to hear their accolades and some people like, let's get to it. So thank you for cutting me off, because you know who you are and we know who you are as well. And we have special guests that are going to come on after you, but you have a program called Impact the Vote. First of all, thank you for putting this out there for the African-American perspective, because we are a predominantly white institution here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And you're doing this program and you got some heavy hitters out there dropping some nuggets of wisdom that the average voter don't consider. So let's talk about that.
So that's what we wanted to do. It's a 4-part series that has already started. And for people who missed it, you can go to my Facebook page at Ed Gordon Media and pick up on the first 2 episodes. But it originally airs on the Impact Network. You have to check your cable system to see if you carry it. But they are a religious network who is now trying to broaden their programming. So they asked me to produce some, election programming for them. So we took 4 issues that we thought were of importance to Black America: the pandemic and healthcare, the economy, which the pandemic will affect, and it's affecting us tremendously. 40% of Black businesses, solely owned Black businesses, have gone out of business, 40% since the pandemic. So it's hitting us ridiculously hard. This coming weekend, Saturday at noon Eastern on Impact, or you can go to my Facebook page again at Ed Gordon Media. We've got a look at policing and social justice. And we got Ben Crump on with me, who's a very good personal friend of mine, and one of George Floyd's brothers. And I will tell you because I've conducted the interview, to see the emotion that his brother brings to the table. I remind people that George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, we can go on and on, unfortunately. But these people have become martyrs and icons to us, but their family has to live every day with losing someone that they loved. And that isn't always easy to just carry on. And so I hope everybody gets a chance to look at what Mr. Floyd had to say about his life after losing his brother. And Ben, there's a moment in the show where Ben just says, I wonder what would happen to the lives of these people had they been allowed to live. And he just starts to rattle off name after name after name. And I didn't stop him. I let him go. And it just went on and on and on and on. And you realize these people were taken from this world unjustly. And I will argue that if not all of them, 99% of them were taken simply because of their race, simply because of their hue of their skin. And we've got to get to that. So the last show next week, we'll look at, we'll be days away from the election at that point. We'll look at where we sit and what we have to do. And then I will note on election night, I've joined with the NAACP to give our coverage that will exist on their social media platforms as well as mine. And I understand they're in negotiations with a couple of networks, but we're going to give our coverage unfettered by the fact that you've got, other people executive producing you. And so starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, myself, Derek Johnson of the NAACP will be talking. Derek will be coming in and out, but I'll be joined by co-hosts, including Jamel Hill, Michael Eric Dyson, and a number of others as we look at, how that night unfolds. And so really that night is going to really depend on us and our turnout. If Black America comes out in the numbers we came out for Barack Obama, I'm assured, as long as we do it in the strategic states because of the Electoral College, that we will see Donald Trump no longer in office. But if we don't come out, we're going to have problems. If you are a Biden-Harris supporter.
Well, we have to make sure that we have a nonpartisan conversation since we're doing.
I added that last one there.
Yeah, the university. But I want to ask you a question about the education piece because, we have students here who are first generation students. They are on financial aid. They're going to be in debt when they graduate. And on your program, you talked about the wealth gap a couple of weeks ago. And what are your guests talking about when it comes to education and this particular election?
Well, I mean, listen, it all comes from the same issues that we've been having, and America is starting to learn about, that Black America has known about our entire lives. If you are a person who gets 50 cents to $1, of a white person or a white neighbor, let's say, you can't, if you choose to send your child to a private school because you don't have that disposable income. If in fact, I go to an historically Black college, or I go to a predominantly white college where I can't receive or get a scholarship, but I want to go, but I can't afford tuition or books or housing because my parents don't make the same for the same job that someone else's parents do, that becomes a generational problem. And so what we're starting to see is some of the issues that African Americans have had have nothing to do with their ability or not to learn or to work or to any other of the issues. It really has to do with how the system allows you to play within it. And so I think it's important to find people in this election season who understand that and who see and who are like-minded and that you vote for them. But I tell everyone that election day is not your last day of participation. It really should be your first day. Too often people see it as their last day. I cast my vote, I did my job, and they walk away. And they wait to see what happens, and either they complain because that person they voted for didn't put enough into what they believed would help them and their community, or they rail against the person that they weren't supporting. And the truth of the matter is, particularly if your candidate wins, now is the demand from your candidate. Look, I voted you in office. This is my expectation. Too often we just walk away and wash our hands after day one, and that being election day in the minds of many people. We've got to start demanding, we've got to start understanding the game better and playing it better.
So, Ed, we have students that are studying in a class called urban policy. And for them to be able to understand like what's happening, and I'm glad you mentioned about past this election, how do you help them grasp about the importance of local elections when it comes to the African American vote? Because you have judges that are going to be running for elections, you have mayors, you have Senate races, you have council seats. So what do you say to those students?
Well, there are a couple of things that are easy examples. So we're all concerned, no matter where you live, no matter your income, no matter your education level, we're all concerned about policing in Black America. What you have to understand is police chiefs are appointed oftentimes by a mayor, and that mayor is an elected position. So you think about Ferguson and Michael Brown and the concerns that that community had about the district attorney and the history that that district attorney had had in dubious racial arrest and bringing people to trial and giving immunity to police officers and the like. That district attorney had been elected over and over and over and over again in a community that had enough Black voters to get rid of if they deemed a person unfit or racist or biased, but they didn't for many, many years. That was a problem that remained simply because people did not vote that person out that they had a problem with. If you are a student, those who determine, whether or not you're going to be able to get aid, whether or not your school is going to be funded in a certain way, all of this comes from local, state, and national elections. And so if you don't participate in it, you really can't complain at the end of the day when something doesn't go your way. If you participate in it and let those who are in those seats know that I'm the reason that you were there, we gave you full support, here are my expectations, then they're either going to follow it or you make it very clear that they will not receive your vote. Most of those people in office, while I'm sure they want to do a good job, also want to keep a job and keep a check. And so if we want to break it down to sheerly just living from day to day, that's where they get, their meals from. And so it's important to understand the basics. It's real basic at the end of the day.
So I'm glad that you said, because I can say this all day and people like, you don't know what you're talking about. But to hear from you, because you are more than boots on the ground, you've been all around the world with this topic. But as I wrap up, because I know that you have other interviews to get to today, Ed Gordon, you saw so many Black males being murdered before cameras. And what is it like for you to see that you're reporting and having conversations, and now we're in a serious election right now?
So, technology changed the game, right? So had America not seen George Floyd be literally murdered on camera, we would not be in the place that we're in. We saw Eric Garner killed, but that didn't strike the same chord. We saw Laquan McDonald be shot in Chicago. That didn't strike the same chord. We saw the argument with Sandra Bland. We saw Mr. Castile on Facebook Live with his girlfriend. And again, unfortunately, I can go on and on, but seeing for 8 minutes and 46 seconds a man being choked to death, literally, and ultimately calling for his mother, who was deceased, made America open its eyes. And so now it's incumbent on America to change. And change will not happen alone. Change will not happen by itself. Change will not happen easily. While I don't condone looting and burning, I do think that the things that we've seen historically change don't come with easy revolution. Revolution has always been a fight in this country, and it will continue to be. So we should understand that we just need to know, as a collective, as a community, what's our ask? What do we want at the end of the day? What do we want when we come to the table? And people are going to have different thoughts of what that is within our community. So we've got to get that done. We've got to understand what's what. But I tell people, literally, this is not just hyperbole or just me talking off the, top of my head or the side of my neck, as we used to say. Lives are dependent on this election, because depending on whether a Democrat or Republican gets in this White House will determine, policing in this country for the next generation or two. We've already seen a roadmap, if you will, for the Supreme Court and how that will be gauged for generations to come. And that is not going against partisan, one way or the other. That's just a fact. If Democrats have their way, you have a more left-leaning court. If Republicans have their way, you have a more right-leaning court. And that affects you, not just this year. Supreme Court's federal judicial positions are lifetime appointments. If that judge, a justice, is young enough, that affects you, your child, and potentially your grandchild. It's game time. We need to vote.
So speaking of game time, we're doing game time with you with Impact the Vote. Now, promise us that you're not going to end the show with just this general election. Like we talked about, the local election is just as important. So can you please keep this going?
So I will tell you that a couple of things are on the table right now. I will start a podcast after the election that is distributed by iHeartRadio. That has already been signed, sealed, and delivered. So we'll start that. And so you'll be able to get that wherever you get your podcast. And there's some things on the table on the television side that we're looking at. So I'm not sure that you've seen the last of me yet. I can't talk about it quite yet, but we're looking at some things.
Well, I am honored to be able to talk to you, and I want all of us to impact the vote, get out and early vote. And thank you so much for your time. Much respect for you. I'm one of those BET babies. And when I walked past you in 2017, I was like, I just want to touch him. But it's been more pleasure just to talk to you and have this conversation. So I know you have to go, but let's continue to watch Impact the Vote on all your social media platforms. Am I correct?
Yeah, you can see full episodes on my Facebook page at Ed Gordon Media, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ed L. Gordon.
Thank you so much, and we will see you on the election night coverage. Thank you so much, Ed Gordon, everybody.
Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. So up next, we're going to talk to a very, very special guest who has a connection to the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And I know people are like, now what now? Well, yeah, that is actually true. I'm going to talk to, I don't want to call him a young man. I want to call him, how do you say this appropriately? A wise man. I want to call him a wise man because he's looking at me at this camera as I talk. So as a 17-year-old, Mr. Thomas McGhee he's a native of Montgomery, Alabama, and he joined the famous march from Selma to Montgomery. He joined the end of that march. And so today he's going to talk to us about his stories from that march, discuss being an educator with a specialty in math, physics, and chemistry, and students. He is a whiz and he tutors students. He was also an athletic director, so he knows about sports. And you can also say that he's an advocate of women. He is the father of our very own Department of Communication department head, Dr. Felicia McGhee. he trained her on how to play golf, where she even earned a golf scholarship. So he is well-rounded, well knowledgeable. He even gave me a sheet on some golf things, and I was like, I'm supposed to learn all these terms. So I haven't had a chance to kind of explore my adventure with golf just yet, but it's coming. But he also helped create the Black Women's Golf Association in Montgomery, Alabama. And now we're going to ask Dr. McGhee to open up her video camera, because she is formerly a reporter from WTVC News Channel 9 here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And she is the Department Head of Communication, the recently re-accredited Department of Communication here at UTC. And I just want to give this one note, because I can't do a whole lot of talking because we got to get to this conversation. But she was a participant just last year, the Association of Education and Journalism and Mass Communications Institute for Diverse Leadership in Journalism and Communication. So to both of you, I want to say thank you to Mr. McGhee, and thank you, Dr. McGhee, for joining us in this conversation. We are talking about impact the vote. And Mr. McGhee, I'm going to start with you, because you were a part of all of this, how it started for all of us with that march when you joined the march from Selma to Montgomery, but you started at the end when you were 17, correct?
Correct, Nicole.
So what was that like? Because when we've talked about this over the years, but now it's more like I need to pay attention to you. You were 17 and you just decided to join?
Well, I was 17, but I was curious as to what it would be like, because I've seen the march from Selma, the two marches that they attempted prior to getting the march to Montgomery, and everybody in the whole nation saw what happened on the bridge in Selma, and for them to get permission to come to Montgomery, and then people in the community of Montgomery decided we would join the march outside the city limits, which we were asked to do, so that the numbers will now regrow. Because coming out of Selma, they told them so far you can go a certain distance, and people had to leave the march because they were only allowed 500 to 600 to walk the mileage from Selma to Montgomery. But once they got to Montgomery, then citizens of Montgomery and others from Selma can rejoin the group, and now we had thousands of them, and I just happened to be one of those who joined. And at 17, I was a senior in high school, and really, it was just, to me, it was a fun thing to do.
So let me get this straight, because it's Highway 80, am I right?
That is correct.
And citizens marched for what, 2 days?
That's correct. Coming out of Selma, they had to stop, I don't know exactly the site, and just camp out, sleep that night on the grounds or whatever, get back up, return to the journey, and until they got into the city limits of Montgomery.
So when you guys got past the barriers of, not letting everybody go to the march, and you had to cut the numbers down, but when you arrived and you saw everybody in that one spot in Montgomery, Alabama, what did that look like?
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. There was people. When I got there, I'm a late person, not really late. Remember now, I'm in school. I have to go to school. So we get out of school, and a lot of my buddies and I from the east side of town, and they were entering Montgomery from the west. So Selma is west of Montgomery. So we had to go like maybe 12, 15 miles to get to where they were coming to. And to look and see all the people, it's almost like we just started running so we can get in line or get somewhere and squeeze in. And it happened. And we were in there singing with the rest of them.
Wait a minute. So I heard you say two things. You all had to get 15 miles to get to the march. And so if you were marching, was there anything that energized the marchers? Did you chant something? Did you sing something? Well, what was going on?
Well, when we viewed the marchers coming in, and other people had joined at the time that I got there, they were already into singing, because I know they sung the whole time coming from Selma to Montgomery. And then you got it and you started to join in with the song. And then, like I said before, there were some songs that just stuck to you, and you remember them over time. And then one of the ones that I can remember joining in with them singing well, I'm not a singer, but so was a lot of others that was there were not singers. But to sing this song, it seemed like all of us turned out to be singers. And one of the songs, Nicole, could be, is that I'm not gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. I'm gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on marching and keep on marching, marching to the promised land. I ain't gonna let those policemen turn us around, turn us around. And now you hear the whole crowd. You have thousands of people are singing. And now that just energizes you now. You walking and singing and just feeling the spirit of it all.
You just, I mean, my eyes are getting emotional because I've seen the videos. I've heard people singing the songs on video, but to connect with a 17-year-old who had that song, ain't nobody let nobody turn me around. You just bring so much emotion to my heart right now. So I do want to kind of do a fast forward version of your life where you went from a 17-year-old and you graduated from Alabama State University and you moved to Pontiac, Michigan. You had a family and you moved back to Montgomery, Alabama. And I want to fast forward to it. The IT folks can help me with the picture of Rosa Parks being booked when she was arrested. We all are familiar with Rosa Parks and her history, but the booking police officer, you kind of are familiar with him because of, I guess you could say, well, I'll let you tell your story with your connection with the booking officer here.
Well, I don't have a story connected with him. I can look at the pictures the way you see it now, but I did not realize that once I left Pontiac, Michigan in my retirement and moved back to Montgomery, Alabama in 2002, this gentleman lived approximately a block away from me, but I didn't know it. But his sister lived next door to me. And my wife and his sister used to sit out on the deck and talk about the golfers that come by. And but we didn't know that was her brother. But over time we did. And when I realized it was her brother was when Felicia, your department chair, came down and she was doing a story. And she wanted me to line up some citizens in Montgomery that she could interview. And then I asked Sue, who I was next door neighbor, about her brother, and she told me, say, "Oh, he'll be glad to do it." And so I lined up that interview for her, and while she was doing the interview, I was doing the video. And so that was the first time that I've actually seen him and talked to him when she did the interview with him. And after that, the conversation gotten better because I would go next door and he might come over to visit his sister, and then we'll have some conversation. But other than that, during the rest of at that time when he was doing this fingerprinting, I did not know the guy.
Okay, so we're going to unshare the screen of the booking agent because that's a powerful shot. We all know when you Google Rosa Parks, you see that booking agent, and now to know Dr. McGhee, you can unmute your microphone, the Department Head of Communication. So this is a part of your dissertation work, and you had an opportunity to interview this gentleman here. What was that like?
Well, I have to tell you, I had read about him. So in my mind, I had an idea of what I thought, but then I was also very nervous. I very rarely get nervous to do interviews, but I was that day. And so I was so glad that my father was going to come with me so I could have that sense of comfort, because you really don't know what he is going to say. He has written a book, and in his book, it talks about it's a different view of the boycott. And he's calling Dr. King a communist and a liar and all this stuff. So it's coming totally out of left field. But now I have to sit down and have a conversation with him. And so it was enlightening, I must say. He sees it totally different from the rest of the world.
So here you are face to face with the gentleman that we've been seeing all of our, teenage and adult lives. And you're interviewing him. And here we are today talking about impact the vote with a very serious election we're days away from. Dr. McGhee, you're looking back at what your father experienced as a 17-year-old. You heard him singing. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. You heard him singing that. What does this mean for you when you have a son that just turned 18 years old? What, today?
Yes, today is Thomas's 18th birthday. You know, the interesting thing about my father is I honestly did not know a lot of this until I was in my 30s. I had no idea that he had marched and that he had participated in other marches as well. So it was news to me. It's so interesting because he has helped me with my doctoral program, but often I would think about the ancestors and what they had to go through. You're talking about the voting rights of 1965. There's the Montgomery Bus Boycott, 381 days where 50,000 Blacks did not ride on a bus. And so when he was able to do that, because I remember him also saying, when you participate in those types of things, not only are you doing it for yourself, but the next generation and the next generation. And so my son Thomas would be the next generation. And it helped put perspective on it because sometimes, you know, as you and I always say, life happens. And there are there are challenges that you face. But guess what? When you think about it, and when I think about, okay, they did this, they were beaten, they did sit ins, they did all of this, and I have this one little challenge. Really? Really? I
So
have nothing to complain about.
I'm glad you brought up about the being beaten because Mr. McGhee mentioned about the training from what the young people experience and being faced with police officers and having to protect the women. Mr. McGhee, can you talk about that training?
Well, Nicole, what I'm talking about, that's different from the march from Selma to Montgomery. Now, there was other things happening in the Montgomery community. For example, there was this building downtown Montgomery, in the center of Montgomery, and trying to think of the name of it, but Kresge Building, I think that was the name of it. But anyway, it had a part of it they call HL Green. And on the street level, they had two levels. The first two levels, that was for white only. They can go in and they can try on stuff. They can buy things. They had counters where they can order food. They had restrooms. Now for the Blacks, they had to come to the back. See, the front part of that building took up a whole block. That was Dexter Avenue. On the back part was Monroe Street. And you come in from the back if you want to go to that store and go downstairs. And there they would have a little counter for the Black people. If you want to order hot dog, cheeseburger, drink, or whatever, you want to use the bathroom, you would get colored. And then upstairs is white. And then if you go downtown anytime on the weekend, on a Friday or Saturday, on that back street, Monroe Street, you would see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Blacks because they had stores for the Black. And I think one of those stores was Weber's. Now we can go in and buy clothes out of Weber's because we could try them on. One of the stores was the James store. It's clothing you can buy, but the stores on the front side, you could not try on anything in there because of the white side only. And now, when my time after the riot, the march into Montgomery, now some of these things was going on, and a lot of the university students, after I've gone to Alabama State, and then the community people, now they did not want this to continue. Colored bathroom, colored drinking fountains. So they're playing little sit-ins. We'll go down, go into the white counter, and we knew at that time there was a Montgomery law that you're not supposed to do that. You know they won't call the police, and they want to get you out of there by all means possible. Now, in preparation for that, they have like little demonstration at different churches telling you what may happen, and you're practicing. You got to do it non-violently. You cannot fight back. And then some of us decide that they're going to stay and that the police do what they're going to do to them. But I wasn't there yet. When I said I was not there yet, I was there. But when the police come in and I see they were going to start dragging people out, taking them to jail, no, I would leave. And I left, Nicole, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm in college now. I'm the first of my family to go in college. There were 9 of us. So there was 6 ahead of me. who never graduated from high school. So I can't afford to go to jail, and I'm gonna finish college, but I'm gonna participate up to a point. And some of the others in the same situation I was. They would leave, but then you had some who would, would be arrested and whatever. But when you said, what will you do doing some of those times? When you see, for example, a young lady like yourself who can participate, or a young lady like my daughter who can participate, and you see something happening to them because they were not the one to lead. Because it seems like the young ladies, for some reason, they'll stay there. Like they can't get hit. And then the teacher said, you go and you cover them. And so you take those punches and pound it and help pull them away. And that had happened to me a couple of times too, just to help them out so they can get away from the scene. But like I said, and then the next day, then you feel all the bruises that happened, and you realize, how did I get that one? But your mind was in a certain place that I have to do this, I got to protect this person, or if I get there in a hurry, I don't get a chance to get hit at all because I'm out of there. But that might be one occasion, then they'll come back the next day and they want to go into another building and they say white zone. But that was the way they did it. But the whole time when you're participating, you can't say anything as far as swearing and cussing back. You keep your mouth closed. You don't fight when they hit you. You don't hit back, and you have to be a certain mindset to do that. But you're doing it for a reason that you might not even enjoy. People after you would enjoy. And so when you said I was at Alabama State and I went through all this too, and I graduated in '69, and my thing was, Tom, at that time they called me Tommy. I said, it's time to get out of Montgomery. And out of Montgomery, I headed to Michigan.
When I say I'm so glad that you had a chance to get out, and it's humbling to hear your story of being the first generation and you understood the risk, but you wanted to be a participant. And I just remember for my own recent experience of interviewing Reverend James Lawson, people call him Jim Lawson, the trainer of the students to do the sit-ins in a nonviolent way, especially John Lewis, Diane Nash, and the like. But to hear him today still be an advocate of nonviolence, and then I'm talking to you, Mr. McGhee, who understood about the importance of nonviolence. And here we are, we're trying to encourage people, all of this sacrifice for so many people before us. And here we are, what is it, October 20th, 2020. And all we're asking and encouraging people of the African American community, go vote. That's all we're asking. Why is this somewhat of a challenge?
Well, the young people that I come in contact with now that I don't, of my age, 73, the only time I come in contact with any young people now is through nieces and nephews that I may have here in Montgomery, or kids that I see on the golf course or whatever, just kids I just see in the community going around. And this is just my perspective. When I see them, they don't see that as any value for them. It was just like being young and they don't think anything can happen to them. It, they're just gonna be here. But to do things in preparation for, let's say, next year, 4 years from now, just like the young people at your university, when they go in, they should come in with an end in mind. I'm gonna be at UTC for 4 years because I see this light at the end of my 4 years. The young people now for voting, if I vote now, what's in it for me right now? They want instant. What's in it for me right now? Unless, people have to explain to them, if you do this now, you not got to think about yourself. You got to think about maybe you have a family. Your kids might have kids. And some things that are going on now, you may have a mother, you may have a grandmother. They're going to be affected by this. And so you need to do your part. If you don't want to help yourself, help the people that mean something to you. When you go out and you think about beyond you, and I think that's a lot of things that I thought about when I was growing up. I didn't just think about myself. I thought about what I want to do 5 years from now when I leave Alabama State. what kind of family I wanted to have, what things that I want to try to get, or what mental understanding that I want to get other than the studies and things that I had at ASU, which was great. And it was just like a building block. And so what you got to do, you got to have long range building vision. And like part of my long range vision was when I started uh, working in education in 69, 70, I started off and boy, it was a good journey. I enjoyed my entire time. But as you move forward in that, your next plan is I have a plan for retirement. And I look at it the same way. Start the building blocks so that once I can retire, what you want to do? I said, I'm gonna move back to Montgomery, Alabama. And because we would visit every summer because I had brothers here, my wife had sisters, nephews, and kinfolk. So we could see the change that was happening in Montgomery, but I wasn't quite ready for it. So I waited my 33 years so they could really come about changes. And now it's just like night and day in comparison.
That is probably my phone. Give me just a second. I'm sorry about that.
But back to the voting thing, until the young people can see how it would impact the people that means something to them. Some can already look at it as it's meaningful for me, and then they can go and branch out, oh, what it would do for my mother and father, what it would do for my kids, what it would do for the later generation, what impact would it have on me 10 years from now? Some young people can do that. But I'm gonna say I must give them 50-50. 50% of them can't, they want everything instant.
Yeah, so I want to open up for questions, and I got a question for Dr. McGhee, and there was a student calling because I do advisement meetings around this time. So I am on the job and on the job. So Dr. McGhee, when you think about what your dad just shared, and then when you think about you being eyeball to eyeball with the officer who was the booking agent for Rosa Parks, and he wrote a book. Do you have a copy of that book? I just want to see it, like just to kind of marinate for myself on that right there. So you heard your dad and his journey. You look at what you've been able to accomplish in your life. Here we are. We're 14 days away, and you know some things that you have read in that particular book. When you put all this together, and you can start sending your questions if you have questions for us. We're interested in taking your questions as we talk about impact of vote. When you try to put all this together of what's important in this election, I don't want to put things in your head. You got healthcare, you've got police reform, you've got education, you've got economic, like what stands out to you as a real key reason why African Americans should get to the polls and vote?
There are two issues that are very close to my heart. Obviously, the shooting and or beating of Black men, which is basically a murder, like Ed Gordon says, and also education. My parents told me a long time ago that if you want to be successful, you have to get education. You have to be educated. And so, and I tell Thomas some of the things my father used to do to make sure that I took my education seriously. I won't tell any of those stories, don't worry. But I do reiterate it to Thomas, like, you have to make your mark. You have to be for something. He just received his voter registration card in the mail on Saturday. And so we're very happy about that. And we're going to go to the polls. But I told him, I said, yeah, we're voting for a presidential candidate, but we also have to think about what do we need? Why are we behind? Why is it that Black people are not making the same amount as a white person on the same job? Why is that happening? How can we change that? There's redlining in the community. What are we going to do about that? There's financially, as you know, this whole COVID thing, oh my God, has put the world over. And you have people who are starving, people who can't get that other meal. And they need that. We are in a fight for our lives. And that's what I tell Thomas, and that's how I feel. I remember sometimes, actually, I think it was my dad, when he would go vote, I got to go to in my little pigtails, and I'd just be standing there. But you know what? They went to vote at every election. I'm not talking just about the presidential election. I'm talking about some of the municipality elections. They always voted. And so they instilled that to me. And it's to me, if I don't vote, I'm doing a disservice, not only to Thomas, but to those who come beyond Thomas, and so you just got to do it.
So we've got two questions here.
Oh.
One is, what actions would you suggest in the post-election phases?
Okay. The post-election phase. All right. So let's say we vote. And, we may have a new president or we may not. But if you remember back in 2016, when we were all a little shocked with the outcome. However, I remember that day, everybody on Facebook was saying, okay, well, that means we got to do this. We got to be careful of the judges that we're going to vote in. And what about our sheriff? At that point, it's like the momentum changed, shift to more local relations and what we can do locally.
The next question, I think Dr. McGhee, your dad will probably want to take this question, okay?
Okay.
Do you feel the power of our vote has changed since the civil rights movement of the 60s to the current times we are living in?
I would say yes. The power of the vote has a lot to do with the elected officials. Now they are coming seeking your vote, where in the past they did not seek your vote because they knew that, I'm going to say this, only 10% of us are going to vote, if that many. But now with the push for voter registration, you have more people now registered to vote. You have more people who are doing the early voting, absentee voting of color, and now it's an impact. Now your candidates who are running for office, now they have to be appealing to that vote. And then you have people running for office that looks like you. Not that, some of them are a little shady, but you have some choices where in the past you really didn't have any choices.
So
here in Montgomery.
We have other questions coming in, and we will conclude, by the way, everybody, 2 p.m. Eastern, actually 1:59 p.m. Eastern. So please send us your questions. The next question, do you worry about the threat of Donald Trump challenging the election results by ignoring mail-in votes, particularly of Black citizens? Basically, this person is saying stealing the election.
I worry about it. They've interviewed the president about that. He's also put it out there that, he says the election is rigged. And so if there is an election where he does not win, I could totally see him fighting against that. It almost, if you remember, the Gore-Bush presidency and having to, they were looking at those ballots one by one, and they were looking at circles on it to see who voted. And that went on for, I'm going to say maybe at least a month, I think, if not. And I could see it actually being at least a month until, if he were to lose the election, for him to leave the premises. That's very important to me. As Dad said, it used to be that 10% of the Blacks would vote, but guess what? These last 4 years have been a wake-up call to everybody. And suddenly it's a good thing when we see all those people lined up to vote for early voting. That makes me happy.
And speaking of early voting, that's why when we conclude, we'll have a slide, particularly of how you can early vote, the locations here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the dates, the times that the polls are open. like we feel a responsibility to share that with people who are joining us and who will be watching this recording a little bit later. But I do want to make sure that, yes, we will show you on how you can early vote. I even took my lawn chair. I had a bottle of water and a little snack in my bag just in case. We have more questions coming in. What do you say to folks who think their votes don't matter?
You want to take that one, Dad?
Yeah, but like I said earlier, Nicole, um, there are individuals that would think that way, and that's only because of, I call it mindset. You know, if you've been held down so long and you've seen things happening for years and years and years, and they just feel like there's nothing I can do. They're gonna do what they want to do anyway. So I'm not gonna vote. And that's why I gave you the explanation. You got to look not just for you. You got to think about the people, the family, or anyone you care about. What can I do to help them? And if you don't have a helping heart in you, then you're going to still maintain the thought that my vote will not count. But if you have a caring heart for someone other than yourself, then you know it's important to vote.
Now I
And
watched. I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to share this with you all while it's fresh in my mind because the age is catching up on me. Like, you forgot that already. But I do want to share this where there was a story out of Mobile, Alabama, and it basically was talking about in the 40s when African Americans tried to go and vote, they would have an opportunity to cast their vote, but the next day they were murdered.
and that's one of the things what you're saying, you know, back then when they first passed the voters' right and when they had the opportunity to vote, then people out of fear would not vote for that reason because they know something would happen to them if they vote. So the mindset was, hey, if you take a chance to vote, you're saying it's okay for them to find me a week or 2 weeks from now, shot or either hanging from a tree. And so you had to make a decision. Do I go vote and hope something happen, but I don't see it? But do I not vote and be here for my family and all the people I care about? So those were the decisions that they were making back in the 40s.
And see, we don't have those issues today. And all we're trying to say in this conversation is for African Americans to utilize the voice and impact the vote and go to the polls. We have more questions coming in and short on time. So I'm going to respect the questions that are coming in and get to the questions and close my commentary. So the next question is, oh, wow, I think you guys are going to like this one. How can Black churches in Chattanooga strategically work together to get more Black people engaged in the local election?
Well, I'm gonna say this. In my reading, way back when I said 17 years old, when I participated in the march coming into Montgomery, the Black churches, basically, that was the voice of the community. The Black churches and the ministers who got out among the community and spread the word. And being a male myself, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, seemed like the Black women was the one who pushed the call. They're coming out of the Black churches. They formed more groups than anybody I know. This was back in the well, let's say the earliest. I was born in '47, but anyway, coming up through that time. But anything that was happening big, the first thing they did was they brought in the Black churches, and it affected the Black community because they know most of us, a high percentage of us, we will go to church. We're going to church, and that's now you're in a place now where the ministers can give us information and hope they can convince us to do what's right to help everybody from that moment into the future.
I also think the churches need to really educate their parishioners, so that they know what the issues are. It's interesting because as Dad talked about the Black churches, and those churches were very vital during the civil rights movement. That's where you got your information. That's where you went and you were uplifted by some of the testimony that you would hear at those Black churches. And so while it's not the same as back then, but the church still has a role, Dad and I, we still go to our church in Montgomery, Pilgrim Rest Missionary Baptist Church. And Pastor Ellis talks about the voting and how we need to get out there and vote for this election. Vote as if your lives depended on it. And so for the Black churches here in Chattanooga, you need to explain to your parishioners why it is important. Because if you don't vote and it goes a different direction, and that's going to affect you, as Dad said, for the next 4 years and affect your children. It's my job to make sure, as a mother of an 18-year-old Black son in this city, okay, that he gets what he needs and that he is not discriminated against. Vote.
And I want to add something to your statement, Dr. McGhee, is churches, you have all of these committees. How about creating an election committee so that year round, everybody's up to date and informed. I got that from the church I've been watching virtually due to COVID. In Harlem, they have an election task force where everything you need about the election, that is covered. Okay, wait a minute. It's 1:55 and we have a few more questions. So when I ask the question, kind of make sure your response is kind of quick. So here's one for one of our sponsors, Office of Multicultural Affairs. What was the most impactful change created by voting you have witnessed in your lifetime? I think this is for Mr. McGhee. And what single change would you like to see?
During my lifetime, like you said, when they changed the voter registration here in the South, what allowed the Blacks to vote, that was a major change for us. When I say for us, that's when I've been living here. That was a major change. Now, what do I like to see is for the others, whether it's Blacks, whites, Latinos, or whoever, is to use that power at the poll to do the things that will make things better for their community. And like I said, their family, their community, and for the whole United States. That's how we can impact.
Dr. McGhee, you look like you wanted to say something.
No, I was going to let him handle that because I know you said the questions, we got to be brief. So,
okay, so we have, we're going to take the last one, and we have a comment to Political Action Committee for the churches. So I guess you can say, good luck with that and talk to your pastors about that. Last question before we wrap up, and remember your response has to be quick for that. How does one balance reasonable self-defense from racists with a wider strategy of nonviolence? And what they're saying is a lot of civil rights movements was largely nonviolent, but some groups use firearms to defend themselves and against other protesters.
Yeah, I've heard that, and you're right, it was nonviolent, but then there were other groups that did use violence. And it was, again, I was not really alive during this portion, but I know that there was that dichotomy, nonviolence and violence, and which one works. And
I'm gonna say one thing, if you don't mind. There was it was not 100% nonviolence through Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy. They believe in a non-violent approach. And that's what most of the people here did. But then you had Malcolm X, and in that group, they did not believe in non-violence. So you had your choices to make. And most of the people in the South, and you notice most of the movements from the South, they believe in non-violence. In the commotion up north, there was violence.
So we don't want to end on a violent note. We want to end on an impact the vote note.
That's right.
We want to make sure that everyone get out and vote. Please look at the screen as we wrap up. And by the way, thank you so much for Mr. McGhee and Dr. McGhee for joining us in this conversation. Thank you to our guest earlier, the award-winning journalist, Ed Gordon. Chattanooga, Tennessee, go out and vote, use your voice. Here are the early voting locations for Chattanooga, Tennessee. Thank you so much for the UTC IT department for making this possible. Office of Multicultural Affairs, Department of Communication. I'm Nicole Brown. It's been a blast talking to you guys. Use your vote, impact the vote.